an underreported story, but basically in what is Adamawa today, that place was full of elephants. But at a point in time in the 19th century when this demand for ivory just went up, pretty much just decimated all those elephants. So people just said, oh, there's actually a market for ivory now. They just went out there and they just started killing elephants. And before you knew what was happening, the elephants were almost extinct. And, I mean, elephants.
Okay.
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 Hey, hi, Toby. Hi. Happy Independence Day, I guess.
Happy. I was gonna say the same. That happy independence. What did you do? I know you are in the UK, but what did you do?
No,
How did
no.
you
So it
spend?
just so I think it just so happened that today, so the school in the next town to me, where my kids go to school. So I'm part of like a parent reading group there, and for some reason, I mean, they didn't tell me, but I just realized that they bought my book in the library. They put it in the school library, and I think they read it, and then somebody just had the idea that, oh, why don't you come talk to the sixth formers? So these are the kind of like well, in another country, you might call them the first year of university, but it's the last year of secondary school. Yeah,
Oh,
so I gave them a talk, and what I tried to do was to, obviously they've studied history, but British history. So what I tried to do was try to do almost kind of like a parallel comparison of what was happening in Britain and then what was happening in Nigeria. Well, what we know as Nigeria back then, and then how those two things. So, for example, things like, say, the Industrial Revolution happened in Britain. People started getting rich. The middle class started appearing, and because of that, they started demanding things like hygiene products. So for soaps and all that, and as a result of that, palm oil demand. They created a palm oil boost in Nigeria because obviously all those things, palm oil went into those things. So, as people got rich in Britain and they started using all this stuff, people also got rich, even though it was a bit more narrow. It was a bit
yeah,
more narrow in Nigeria, but people also got rich. Or even things like, the Victorians, as they made money, they started buying the idea of having a piano in your own house became quite popular. And back in those days, the pianos, they had those keys were ivory, right? And then people started killing elephants to supply ivory. It's one of those crazy things that is an underreported story. But basically, in what is Adamawa today, that place was full of elephants. But at a point in time in the 19th century when this demand for ivory just went up, pretty much just decimated all those elephants. So people just said, oh, there's actually a market for ivory now. They just went out there and they just started killing elephants. And before you knew what was happening, the elephants were almost extinct. And I mean, you can't breed an elephant, right? It's very, very, it's near impossible to do. It takes forever. So if people just decide that, oh, all of a sudden they start seeing an elephant as a source of income, it wouldn't take much. It wouldn't take very long for them to just wipe them out. So yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah. Wipe out the population.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it's like I just kind of drew parallels. Things that were happening in Britain as the jihad was finishing in Nigeria. Abolition was happening in Britain, in there, and those two things will collide later in a few years. Yeah. So yeah. So that was it was quite interesting. Yeah.
yeah. Were there Nigerians in the audience or students
Yeah,
of
probably.
Nigerian
I mean,
origin?
yeah, definitely. I mean, the school has a few Nigerian origins in it, so I'm sure there were. I don't know their names, but there were about 120 of them, and I'm pretty sure at least a couple of them a few will be Nigerians. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Getting into this, I feel. I mean, 65 years is as good a time as any
Mm.
to take stock of what, I mean, if you're, as a person, if you're 65 years old and you're still trying to figure out who you are or what your place in the world. I'm sure that even in Nigeria, questions will be asked that, Oga, what have you been doing all these years,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, if you're a
So,
Christian, the Bible promised you 3 square and 10, right? That's 70. So if you believe that, I mean, you've got 5 years left.
so I mean, the Nigerian economy and the healthcare system even guarantees you less than 70. So,
Exactly.
so, um, So I feel like Nigeria can be roughly broken into three epochs, right?
Mhm.
The first being the bit that you guys covered in formation, that is everything that happened perhaps 1914. The second epoch for me would be 1914 to 1960, which is
Yeah.
pretty much
Yeah. Yeah.
the colonial era. And of course, the third epoch, which is where we are living, is 1916 to date. We, for good or bad, we've sort of reduced our history to the last 65 years, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
somewhat misguided. But what I just want us to first discuss is, again, going back to history, because history is a very, very strong structural force. Uh,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
highly underrated, but it's a very, very strong structural force. In what ways would you say Nigeria is still somewhat trapped in history?
Mm.
And what are the historical bits or things that may seem like they were persistent, for a while, but that we managed to break out of?
Mm. Right. Okay. So, I'm always wary of sounding like a crank when I start talking about this because people are just say, "What's?" I mean, this guy is crazy. What's he talking about? But basically, my starting point is always this, right? Like what we know, right? What we know is that a cargo of slaves was taken to Europe somewhere around the very late 15th century. So I think 1497 or something or thereabout, right? Now, if you look at it from that period up until when abolition came in, so which was the beginning of 1807, the beginning of, I mean, it still persisted. So even after 1807, right, slavery still went on in Nigeria for at least another 100 years plus, right? This is 400 years at least, right, of where the idea that some people are not human or some people are subhuman, and the idea that some people could be owned by other people. This is 400 years documented that we know. It could be longer. There are parts where we don't know, right? But this is 400 years documented where the idea that one person can own another person and you're basically property. This is something that went on for that long, right? And I really, really struggle to understand the ramifications of something like that. So when you set that against what we have currently now, I mean, everything pales to significance, right? Well, what is 65 years compared to 400 years? So I think that has really, really shaped us in so many ways, right? So today I was having a discussion with some friends, like a friend he mentioned that he had driven. There's this new Chinese road that is tolled from Abuja. I think it's Abuja Kefi Road or something. And he said he drove around and he went to Benue State, and he said that the thing that basically his entire driving, right, was about 12 hours, so back and forth, and he saw maybe about two factories, and those two factories were Chinese owned, and then everything else was pretty much petty trading. Small market, just people just trading. That's all, you know. But obviously, those two places where you had those Chinese factories, I think they were in Nasarawa State, there was order, there was organization. You could tell that there was some serious economic activity going on here. Beyond that, everything else was just, so we are now in a place where, and when we were talking, I was like, look, one of the solutions to this is for us to better aggregate, right? We need to aggregate better in the sense that this whole idea that everybody just sit in your states, do your own thing in your state. We need bigger cities. Like, you know, I know I promised to write a follow-up piece to that my piece on the impossible equation. But one of
Yeah.
I haven't written it yet, but one of the things I want to really talk about in the impossible the second part is that in Nigeria of today, there are no metro areas, right? Because of just the way we're structured, in the sense that so if you go to Texas, for example, you have an area like the Dallas Fort Worth area. This is a massive urban area, and you pull taxes together. in that area, you pull, infrastructure together, or even New York City is, I mean, what is New York City? Is it about seven boroughs or something? But just come together and have like a giant urban area or Los Angeles or something. We don't have that. I mean, today in Nigeria, Lagos Island is not, and the reason why we don't have that is that because for you to do that, you need to be able to pull taxes together. You need to be able to pull revenues together, whether it's by property taxes or even income taxes, pull them together and then deliver services. And then when you create that agglomeration, you have a better chance of having a lot more economic activity that can draw people. Whatever you might say of Lagos is a mess, is disordered, but really, in the whole of Nigeria, what else is going on? It's the
Yeah,
one drawing
yeah,
people, and a lot
yeah.
of it is just that aggregation effect. So, one of the things that we need to do, and I say this, that there was a time in our history, and this time that went on for so long, whereby the incentive was for people to live in their own pockets. Where you didn't want to consolidate. You are better off hiding in your own little corner or avoid domination by someone else. Just be your own small entity. But that time has passed, right? It's gone past. We are no longer, we I mean, slavery is not a thing anymore in whatever that sense. So we need one of the things that we really need is to really fight against that part of our history that has led to all this balkanization and proliferation and all those kind of atomization of different. So I think, yeah, I think it's an historical effect where we can't really build anything big that requires coming together. So my first step would be that, look, there's a lot of Nigeria where nothing is really happening. And we just have to be honest with ourselves. There's pretty much no economic activity. But if you were able to pull together, create a giant urban area where people can come. I mean, I've seen stories on Twitter where somebody's talking about how there's somebody in some states, in maybe Katsina, he has a job in Abuja, there's a job offer in Abuja, and he can't go and do it because he cannot afford the transport. The transport fare, that sort of thing. So, if we were able to do that, in a sense, like uh fighting against our historical legacy, basically, and say, look, what is Lagos State? What is Ogun State? I mean, there can be a giant metro area somewhere in between those that traverses both states, and it should not be beyond the imagination or of what we can construct by ourselves out of that. What is Port Harcourt, right? And all those other smaller neighboring states out there, if we pull all these places together and make it possible for them to have these giant urban areas, because I mean, you look at the story of China, right? It's incredible. That urbanization, even if you forget even what has happened since 1917, but just under Xi Jinping alone, it is incredible. China is now about 70% urban or thereabout. When Xi Jinping became leader, I think it was under 50%, right? And they've been able to move people from rural areas to the urban areas, and even they've done it without creating ghettos or slums or anything. So I think for us to stand a chance, we need to pull forces together, have these bigger, bigger cities where, economic activity can happen, where people can actually live where they are, get in there and have a chance of developing skills, using their skills or something. Obviously, there are challenges around what do you organize an economic area around. You know, I mean, you cannot replicate Abuja that is organized around government, right? But you need something.
Mhm.
You need something else to do that. But I think, that is one of the biggest challenges. And I feel like what we have today as our current structure, where, you know, we think that somebody is poor in location A, the solution seems to be that, okay, let's try and find a way to take government services to him in that location A while he's there, or something, and not realizing that actually we need to be able to say, you know, it is because of that place where they are that they are poor. A lot of people are poor because of their location. and that they are trapped in that poverty. And our solution has to be that, how do we remove people from this place that is making them poor? It's just a reality that, if you're in some places, you know, there's no economic activity happening around you, there's nothing going on, you're better off taking people out of there. So how do we do that? Is it by infrastructure? Is it by building a lot more, building our cities better, planning them out, building housing, that sort of thing? So I think that's one of the first challenges that we probably are not really thinking about, how it is actually a historical legacy for us in there, and it is something we need to wage, almost kind of like wage war against, and then say, look, we need to move this uh, away we need to move away from this history, because the fears, the things that caused all those things, they're not there anymore, right? So
Mm.
we can envision and build a new future.
One of the things that, I mean, it's good you segued into this. One of the things I've always wondered is that, first of all, really, there is really no what you can call developmental thinking, at least the way you would talk about it
Mm,
in China
mm, mm,
or even in the United States
mm,
at a certain period in history, to the way we make policy. So I've always wondered, what is the organizing principle around the way we do supposedly development projects, maybe like infrastructure. And
mm,
I mean, you just talked about the road. That road would have been in a different location that would drive better economic activity than, and there are so many of such infrastructure projects
mm.
in Nigeria, or not just infrastructure projects, policies, whatever,
Yeah.
name it, right? So I wonder, is one thing that we are not really using right now, or that we are using the wrong way, because the issue of, identity, you talked about the impossible equation. I borrowed heavily from that piece
Mm,
in the piece I published today. And of course, you've also written about diversity. Nigeria's sheer pluralism is always a problem.
mm,
A couple of weeks ago, there was this uproar about the presidency or the government is unfair to the North. And there was this whole jamboree
mm,
about number of projects that was done and where it was done, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, listening to all the noise about that debate, one thing that kept ringing in my mind, which I've actually said to friends, is that the way we are not really deliberate about these things may
mm,
actually work in ways that we fear, but not by intent.
mm,
The way that the economic geography of the country will be shaped in the next 50 years or thereabout,
mm,
given the fact that we are not really deliberate about these things, may actually appear the inequality will be mad,
mm.
seriously.
Yeah.
So I've always wondered, when you think about this, what do you think would be like the primary unit, or what should be the primary unit of development to organize
Mm,
economic activity around? So, like I was saying, what I don't think we are using well right now is the region thing. Southeast, Northeast, the six geopolitical zones,
mm,
right? I think roughly, it's a good it's a good subnational unit to organize around in terms of federal
mm. Yeah.
project or economic policy.
Mm,
And another thing I wonder is that, what exactly is the constraint around subnational economic cooperation? Recently, I know Lagos is doing produce for Lagos partnerships with Niger.
mm.
Whatever the stupidity of the kinks of that, it's a good
Yeah.
initiative in my opinion. Uh, I think if done well, it could actually drive agricultural, if not productivity, at least production in some of the places. So, because I've always wondered why Ondo and Ekiti, for example, cannot build a port and transport infrastructure that connects those two states. We know Ekiti is very, very agriculture centric. right?
Mhm.
And create an export corridor around that area. And Ekiti at the time was building, or maybe they built an airport. This subnational uh, competition and even cooperation, what is the constraint, right? Other than the fact that, yes, we know that we can talk about that all day. We manage to elect the wrong people who are just there to eat money, right? But in moving the conversation behind that obvious fact,
Yeah.
so what are the constraints and how can it be better incentivized?
So I think obviously, I mean, the obvious constraint is money, So like what you just talked about now, like a port, I think, the way colonialism worked, it was, I always say that I mean, the fact that Lagos became the center of, colonial activity was not a mistake. It wasn't that because the British were stupid or something. It's just, you know, natural harbors, right, is something that I don't know why God did it like that. This is one of the things I question God about sometimes, in the sense that eh, natural harbors are just so scarce in Africa. It is so scarce. Lagos is, to my best of my knowledge, the only one we have in Nigeria. Everything else will require, I mean, obviously, it's not beyond human ingenuity, and people have obviously overcome this kind of problem, but it's just that if you are going to build a port anywhere outside of Lagos, it's going to cost you a lot of money in the sense that,
Yeah.
the water, I mean, in a place like, say, rivers or something, you probably have to go and put it way out, or, way out on the ocean or something, or you are going to have to pour a lot of concrete just to get um that port up, So that lack of natural harbors, and this is something that is so common in Europe, common in America, but it's just a scarcity thing. Okay, be that as it may, right? Even if we don't have the money, at least we have human beings, right? Which is obviously a big chunk of whatever it will cost you in terms of the labor cost. So we have a lot of people. So we have already at least one of the things that can help us get it done. So money definitely, in the sense that if you are going to build anything, it just costs a lot more. And then we've not developed those skills, in terms of do we have an engineering tradition, right? In our myths, in our origin stories, all the stories, are there any engineering stories in there? I mean, I was reading something about China recently, and there's a guy called Yu the engineer, right? So obviously it's all a fake story, right? It's almost kind of like you can think of it as something like maybe our Ududua, another. But the story of that Yu is that he was able to stop a tide with some kind of engineering feat. And when was it Hu Jintao was the Chinese premier, when they were um when they were uh, what's it called, commissioning the Three Gorges Dam. He referenced it in his speech that we are people who have always been able to tame the waters from the time of you, the engineer, to today. And I thought that's a really nice thing to be able to have. So you can imagine if, say, uh, if the president, for example, if Nigeria had one massive engineering feat that we did, and then the president can reference that, oh, it is something that was done by Bayajida, or Bayajida did this, and then today, and all that. So those myths, right? And again, these myths can be created, right? Do we can create the myths that we are people who conquer our environment, and we don't see the environment as, that place is dangerous, we stay away from it. We actually can tame the environment. So I think the first answer to your question obviously is that money is a big challenge. We've struggled with any kind of thing that organizes ourselves into. We had the blessing of oil, right? We had the blessing of oil, and we could have really parlayed that
But the cost
into,
depends.
yeah. But we could have actually channeled, all the money from oil into a lot of infrastructure and really taught ourselves how to how to tame our environment. Unfortunately, here we are today. Um, oil is pretty much is done, right? And you cannot go to the Niger Delta today and look at that place and think that billions of dollars worth of oil was extracted out of this place. I was watching a documentary. I have, one of my favorite documentaries. It's on Apple TV. It's called The Reluctant Traveler. Eugene Levy, and he goes around place. So the last one he went to Louisiana, and they went on this caravans. They went on this what they call RV, recreational vehicles. But then there was a part where they went to some creeks with some boats, and I just thought to myself that. So you mean you're telling me that because it was like this is pretty much the Niger Delta, like pretty much going through creeks and swamps, and it's become a tourist activity. And I was just thinking to myself that you're telling me that you could actually turn the Niger Delta into something like this, but obviously we've, they polluted the place with oil, built nothing in there. It's a dangerous place, that sort of thing. So, you know, frankly, for me, I think I've settled on the idea that whatever it is that we're going to do now, it has to really just start with education. Like go have a determined focus and say, look, every Nigerian, we want to equalize that. It doesn't matter whether you are born in Putiskum or in Port Harcourt. You know, we want every Nigerian to be able to read and write up to a certain level, right? Just basic education. And then university can come later, but up on to say, we can say we will go heavy up to say GSS 3, right? And say we want everyone to be able to complete 9 years of education. And at the end of those 9 years of education, we want everyone, and we want to say that, and we want to do it in such a way that we say we can put a floor under every child born in Nigeria and say it doesn't matter where you're born, whether it's in the north or the south or the east, but those 9 years of education, we are going to throw everything at it, right? We're going to dedicate resources there, and that after those 9 years, everyone who comes out of that will be able to read and write to a certain level. Now, after that, we can, then we can say, okay, SS3, or SS1 to SS3, maybe, but just focus, you know, resolve and drive. And, I always think about the story that, Web Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois told. He said,
Yeah, yeah.
when, obviously after slavery, after the American Civil War ended and the South had been defeated, you then had a whole massive underclass of black people who had been deliberately, obviously, kept in servitude, uneducated, that sort of thing, and they were all there were millions of them in the South. And you then had this massive program of teachers flooding from the North to the South and saying, we need to educate all these people. And the most remarkable start for me is that, well, the American Civil War ended, what, 1865 or something? By 1900, there were the proportion of blacks in America, in the South in America, who were educated was higher than the proportion of educated people in Spain, right? So just the black population, right? The proportion of educated blacks was higher than the proportion of educated Spaniards in Spain. It was a remarkable thing because it was basically sending an army of teachers down south and saying, we're just going to educate every black person we can find. And Webb Du Bois, he said, is the finest thing America has ever done, or something like that to that effect, that sort of thing. So, I mean, we have human beings, we have hundreds of millions of Nigerians. We don't really know what to do with them. We can't organize. I think for me, I'll just say the first thing is like, look, let's just educate people, those take that primary school and maybe the first 3 years of secondary school and just take it as sacred, right? It is almost kind of like the most important thing for us to do. And we just go ham on it. And say, and then after that, but you see, what we have today is just a question of uh, primary school is just primary school. Like in some, it is the responsibility of state. And then when it comes to university, then
You went to school in Nigeria and you know how it
yeah,
is.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And then government starts to try and splash money on at university level. By that time, it's too late, right? I mean, what
Yeah,
are you doing then? Yeah.
yeah. Something you said. So sometimes when I think about it, I know that uh, we've been trying to get Olufemi Taiwo to come on the podcast.
Mhm.
if anybody knows him in the listenership, and maybe
tell him to
if he
check his
deleted,
email. Yeah.
tell him to check his email, oh, please. So we've been trying to get him on the show, and part of it is provoked by that really, really provocative book he wrote a couple of years ago, Africa Must Be Modern, which I love very much because a lot of what you said, especially on the education and even the Chinese example, and I think way back on one of your, I think book reviews or annual book reviews, you
Mm.
talked about Japan and how mythology and the literature around it had to be
Yeah.
repurposed for a
Yep. Yep.
modernity project.
Exactly. I
So
love that. I love
because
that story so much. Yeah.
really so yes, I make podcasts, but I also consume a lot of podcasts that like I'm sure you do too. Recently I was listening to a podcast about the history of insulin. And the original paper has existed way before the 1900s. But the research that started the first chemical compound to be synthesized as insulin was done in 1923. And what I would think to myself as I was listening to that is, okay, 1923, where was Nigeria? And what what exactly were we doing in 1923? I tried to cast my back. And, given, we are not like the Chinese who can always rely on history that, oh, yes, we were once a great civilization. And for a lot of Chinese modern economic revival is actually channeled through history that, oh, we were once a great civilization. They
Yeah.
even lie in some of these
Yeah,
documents.
of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what
Like,
Xi Jinping is saying. Like the
yeah, like these old,
civilization. Yeah.
like these old 5,000-year-old civilization thing,
I mean,
which
that's a
is
lie. That's a lie.
historically
But
is bullshit.
who cares?
But
Who's
yeah,
gonna
but
prove it?
yeah, so like it's to inspire pride.
Mm, exactly.
I've always wondered what our version of that could be. Something that could really rally the minds
Mm,
of everyone around this project that we really, really have to start living in our time, and we really, really have to start building for the future. Uh, I just can't see, something that doesn't involve us trying to debate juju as legitimate science and trying to argue
mm,
that herbs have magical powers or whatever.
mm,
I can't find it.
mm.
And
But you
I
see,
don't,
but it can be done. It can be done.
it can be
Like
done.
so like the best example of this is, although this is not related to science or something, but I always thought, when Flora Shaw, after she married Lugard and all that, when Lugard was in Nigeria, because I mean, when they were dating and all of that, she was writing a lot about Nigeria, and then she published a book. And in that book, she said she did a lot of research and traced the history of a lot of African kingdoms, basically, And Azikiwe said that when he read that book, he said it that and it wasn't just Azikiwe alone. He said it was a few others. That book actually inspired independence movement because what they said was that what Azikiwe said specifically was that this book was an eye opener. And you are telling me that we've been organized kingdoms, we ran a bureaucracy. No, not well, I mean not in football, but at least we organize states.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
if we've done it before, if you're saying we've done it in the
We can do
past,
it again.
we can do it again. So we want
Mm-hmm.
independence, and it was just a fascinating, So the stories like that can be created. Look, you and I today we are Yoruba, right? But
Mm-hmm.
before the British came, you and I were probably fighting each other. If we go back in 19, look, the Kiriji was what started it. Who knows what it was about? It was just Yorubas fighting and fighting each other, and then all amazingly today, you've created an identity where you know you and I are now something that we can now say, oh, there's an umbrella.
Brother.
There's a,
Yeah.
and the same thing with Igbos as well. The Igbo umbrella was created. So these things can be done. You can create those, but again, to go back to the word you used earlier, deliberate. You have to be deliberate. Like, look, what do we want? We want to inspire a new generation to believe in development. So we can repurpose stories, right, from the past and all that. For example, in the Japan example you were talking about, where women started, there was a story of a female Japanese warrior. It was a myth, obviously, that fought Korea, and she was pregnant for 9 years, and it was during that pregnancy that she fought. She went to go and fight Korea, and she won the battle. And then women in Japan took that story and said, okay, so if women could be fighting with pregnancy and leading wars and everything, then what are you saying? That women today, and they use that to shake off the shackles of patriarchy that were holding them down. If a woman in our history could go to another country, fight a war while pregnant for 9 years, then why are you saying today that women cannot work? Why are you saying today that women cannot do this or women cannot do that? They have to stay in one part of the society. So, and there were so many stories like that where, they will say, they will just take an old story because the imperative was modernity, development. They'll take an old story and then just change it completely and then start telling people that new version that says, actually, there is nothing that, even though we're a traditional society, we have hierarchy and all of that, but when you actually think about it, you know, there's nothing in our story that is anti-development. So I think for us, that's the first part we need to get to. Take our stories, it's the existing story, but reinterpret them and say, actually, there is nothing in the story of Oduduwa or whatever, or whoever, or whoever is the mythology, and say, look, there's nothing in this story that is against building a modern
And
society,
progress.
and
Yeah.
economic development and progress and all those kind of things. So, and you connect with people in that way, and so many countries have done this. Like a lot of people have done. People, it's all lies, but look, human beings don't relate to facts; they relate to stories. That's just what it
Mm,
is. It is stories
mm.
that will get people to move and to act. You can throw all the data, you can throw all the economic data you like all the time. It will appeal to you and I or something, but if we want to do something broad based at the scale of Nigeria, we need better stories, you know.
I mean, the story of this blog is in itself a testament to what you are saying.
Yeah.
Some of our most popular pieces have not really been the most
Yeah, exactly.
analytical.
I mean, the most popular story, the most popular articles we've done are Femi Otedola, Buhari, Herbert Wigwe. I mean, it
Exactly.
is.
You know.
That's what
So
the people want. That's what the people
you
relate
know,
to. You know.
and I know she'll kick me for this. My partner and I have always argued something that which I've come to agree with her, especially in the AI, is that IFA, the story of IFA can always be repurposed
Of
for
course,
AI. I
of
mean,
course,
this is
of course.
basically
Yeah.
a machine that tells you stuff. That is, you know.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, how is Siri or Alexa different from Osani? So these things are.
Yeah, exactly. We need to bring all these things into modernity and say,
Mm,
I think the fundamental question, like we said, is look, there is nothing about the Ifa or something that is anti-progress, that is anti-science. That's the thing we need to really say. Like, look, because you believe in tradition does not mean that that the tradition is against science. We need to find ways to repurpose those stories and say, actually, here is science, here is Ifa, there there is no quarrel between them. You know, here is juju or not, okay, maybe not juju, but whatever it is, that you believe. Because you see, the thing with juju is that it is a very, very pernicious thing in the sense that
mm,
it works on fear, right? So people who have, everyone has a story of juju, even though they've never seen it themselves, or they've never actually seen it happening, and it creates a kind of capriciousness. I always use the story of Haiti that when that earthquake hit, it was so bad, partly because people just didn't really build houses properly because the idea that it's going to happen, it's going to happen. If an earthquake is going to happen, you can't do anything about it. It's going to happen. So what is the point in fortifying or building better. So, there's an aspect of that where it just makes people have this capricious view of life that, no, a bad thing is a bad thing. It's going to happen. And there's nothing you can do about it. Everything is predestined. We cannot change anything. So you want to obviously tread a fine line with that. But, the things that people believe and, incorporate science into them and say, look, there is no quarrel, right? There is no quarrel with science. There's no quarrel with modernity. There's no quarrel with economic development, and then find a way to begin to get that into people's heads. Because, look, if people, what the eye doesn't see, like I say, the heart cannot make about. A lot of people I think we don't really understand what we've done to our country in the sense that the way we've limited imagination. I did a piece on tall buildings a while ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I'm in my 40s, right? And in my lifetime, the tallest building in Nigeria has not changed. It is the Nitel building. In my
Mm-hmm.
lifetime, that has remained the tallest building in Nigeria my entire life. If I was in
Mm.
China, the idea of a tall building, I mean, I'll be tired of it by now. Because if I had lived this same life in China, I would have seen multiple buildings go till to the point where now, I mean, when I went to Shanghai many years ago, I went to the tallest building in Shanghai. It was mesmerizing. I went to the 91st floor. In fact, unfortunately, I chose the wrong time because I went in the evening and I thought, oh, I'll be able to take pictures. By the time I got to the 91st floor, I was in the clouds. you know it literally almost could not see anything. It was like flying. It was like being in a plane. It was just in the cloud. So I had to go down a few floors and then to be able to see properly. But just being on the 91st floor, and this kind of thing was just there, right? You can just cross the bund and go over there, just pay a small amount of money. You enter the lift, even the lift taking you up. So imagine if I mean, so somebody my age growing up in Nigeria and somebody my age growing up in China, completely different experience, completely different um, range of imagination. In the sense that you've seen tall buildings go up, you've seen an area in your lifetime, you've seen an area that was swamp, that was marsh, and all of a sudden now a modern shiny city has gone up there. But if you're growing up in a Niger Delta, you've seen the creeks all your whole life. You've not seen a building that is even 25 stories tall. It's just the same thing. And this kind of thing, they really limit the imagination. So there's a failure of leadership, but also that has then led to a failure of imagination in so many ways.
Mm. Mm. So, I mean, I see people in the comments talking about education, and
Mm.
one uh, controversial for some reason thing but I know we talk about this. Part of the constraints, like doing all these things, is do you see IQ? Does it ever feature in your thought as something that is a barrier? Depending on who you ask, and I've read some pretty serious research. Nigeria's national IQ is about 68, between 68 to 73, which is pretty terrible,
Yeah.
right?
But it's what
But
you would expect, right? I
but
mean,
yeah,
it's
no,
a
but it
country
is
where
what
we,
it
we've
is.
we've done, yeah.
But yeah, it is what it is. But I mean, moving beyond even say like maybe the determinism of
Mm.
that, I am always shocked at how, so like in this conversation we've talked about infrastructure, and I mean that's one thing that it seems the Tinubu government is pretty drunk on. I mean it's the Lagos model, right? It's
Mm.
in their minds it's the easiest way to monetize or raise taxes or whatever it is they are trying to do. Is just build a lot of infrastructure. Buhari also did that for 8 years, despite the fact that he wrecked the economy, right?
Mm.
I forgot the exact quote from uh this guy, the founder of Mayo Clinic, I think William Mayo or something, that
Mm.
the wealth of a nation is the health of people. How much we have neglected healthcare and education, what we call the human capital industries,
mm,
and how little attention it gets.
mm,
So
mm,
I read a paper by Eric Anushek, who is like the Caesar of education research in certain circles. And he was writing about the basic literacy problem in
mm,
developing world. And by his own estimates, that is like $700 trillion in foregone potential income globally.
mm.
That number, it looked stunning. It was unbelievable to me, but I downloaded his data and ran the logistic regressions myself,
Mm.
right? I My numbers came up at around 704 trillion, but rounding error. Right? So I know that they've done nail fund. Why is it why is it impossible to take education, healthcare, and things that can even raise IQ like nutrition? We are waiting on Bill Gates to invent and fund micronutrients to solve the nutrition problem for us.
So
Why
I mean,
can't we why can't we take it seriously?
yeah. So I think it's an incentive. So first of all, I think the thing with IQ is that for me, I'm comforted by the fact that the Flynn effect is real, right? So the same set of people who have 70 IQ today can have 90 IQ in a few years. So there's nothing fixed about it. It can be improved. In fact, just given so if you say you measure an area in Nigeria, for example, you measure the IQ today, and then just say, okay, every child that is born here, we're going to put iodine in their food, right? That alone will bump up. Without even doing anything else, just basically making sure that their food is iodized, because this is one of the best, little things like that in, making sure that you are building schools with story buildings. When I talk about it, people think that maybe I'm just being a crank or something, but there are millions of kids growing up across Nigeria who have never climbed a staircase. These things matter in the sense that when kids are growing up, just developing that spatial awareness, that motto, that just climbing stairs. People, other people, you can take it for granted, but just imagine that there are people who've grown up to a certain, and they've never been able to climb a staircase. So all those things, the IQ thing is fixable. To your question of why we can't do it, this is where we've picked up the worst of democracy, in the
Mm,
sense that this whole 4-year cycle thing, right?
mm,
In the sense that, there is just not much incentive for a leader to invest in education. And if you do 2 terms, right? If you say you have a push to develop education for at the primary level, it is not going to happen. The results are not going to come in under you, even if you do 2 terms. Say you're a governor, right? You cannot really. So you take new kids that are born, right, and say, okay, we're going to start making sure that we raise the standard of primary schooling in my state. You cannot see the results until for 8 years, and you'll be gone out of office, and it's going to cost you money. So which is
mhm.
why I think that kind of thing, it just has to be a national thing whereby we say, okay, we are doing this thing because it is the thing to do. It does not need any other explanation, right? I love that. To paraphrase that Chino Achebe quote in Things Fall Apart. You know, when we gather under the moonlight in our compound, it is not because you cannot see it in your house. It is not
Mhm,
because
mhm.
if the moon is shining, if the moon is bright, you can see it from your compound. I can see it from my compound. But we gather together in one compound because it is good for men to do so. It is good for brethren and kin to gather together, right? So every man can see I think the exact quote is that every man can see the moon from his own compound. But we gather together because there is something good about us us gathering together under the moon, eating, drinking, and talking, right? So we need to have this thing and say, look, the education of young children, the development of human capital, it is We are doing it because it is good to improve our human capital. So that way, almost kind of like elite consensus, that way we can decouple it from the whole idea of something you do to get votes. It is not for votes. You are not boosting education and health and nutrition for kids because, we're not doing it because you want them to vote for you. You are not going to be around when the kids start voting. It becomes enshrined as something we do because it is a good thing. It is the thing to do. And as a standalone, I don't know how we can get around it, but it needs an elite consensus where the president knows that if I push for this, the governors are not going to oppose me. And that's what the elite consensus is about, that somebody will not see it as an opportunity to tackle me and then, campaign against me. Right. So for example, you see uh, when we've had subsidy debates, you know, we could never really get that consensus because somebody somewhere saw votes in opposing that whole idea. So you see people just go on TV and just talk rubbish, you know, because they know that no, there's an opportunity, there are a few votes. And so, that elite consensus has to be that, the governor would know that if I dedicate billions to education, my opponent in the other party is not going to use that as an opportunity to campaign against me and say, "Oh, I'm wasting money or something," or that kind of. So we just need that consensus because, and we have to do it. There is no other reason. There's no. I cannot. You cannot do it. Like I said, you cannot give people good health and education in exchange for their votes. It's not going to happen. We just have to do it because we want to have a better society, right? We want to upgrade Nigeria from what it is and to, even if only slightly, but change the trajectory that the country, because, you know, we're heading into the future with 200 million people who have barely any human capital development applied to them. What exactly are we expecting in 2050? Or
mm,
2060. Does anybody really think that on the trajectory that we're going, that in 2050 in Nigeria, we'll have high-speed trains, we'll have decent accommodation where people can live in nice houses and we'll have well-organized city? It's not going to happen on this trajectory. How? It's not, I mean, there might be one or two better routes somewhere, but we are not going to have a radically transformed society where, if there's a lot better infrastructure, there's a lot better. It's we have to do the work now to alter that trajectory. And, it has to come from that elite consensus whereby the politician is not afraid or is not worried about losing votes because he spent money on education and he spent money on healthcare.
And so, I mean, this, I know that, we have limited time to do this, obviously. It's not a podcast, people. Uh, so it brings me to something that consistently came up, I think in the last two solo episodes we did. Of course, the question of leadership and
Mm,
what both of us think about the last election and the people who were
mm,
involved. Because, I mean, before I read I read a little bit about it. I've given up on leadership in Nigeria because it's always I've given up. But I mean, there was one economic historian, I forgot his name, Mark Oyama. Yeah, Mark Oyama managed to convince me otherwise that okay, if it is a coordination problem, then
mm,
really electing good leadership, one man really can change the world.
mm. That's why I've not given up. And for me, that's the only reason why I've not given up because, from my own
Mm,
point of view, is that Nigeria is due some luck.
mm,
This is all I'm
mm.
gambling on. That's all I'm betting on. That it
Yeah.
is high time we get lucky. If you keep rolling the dice, I mean, because I mean, did we offend God? Okay, maybe we may have offended God, but I mean, even if God is holding a grudge against Nigeria, at some point,
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
that
you
grudge
bring that.
we just do it, like, and the question I always ask all the time is that what did the people of Singapore do to deserve Lee Kuan Yew?
Sleep
Is it
on you,
because
yeah.
is it because they were good
They
people?
were
No,
so pure.
they got lucky.
Mhm.
They got lucky, and what exactly did the Chinese people do to deserve Deng Xiaoping after Mao? People get lucky, or Park Chung-hee in Korea. I mean, he was a dictator, but people can get lucky. So I'm not ruling out luck for Nigeria in the sense that you
Mhm.
can just have someone who, and I always tell, I'm sure I've shared this story before, but there was an article one guy wrote he said when he was in university, they were discussing Serit Sekama, and
Mhm.
the economic development story. It was an economics class, and the teacher took them through how the guy bucked the trend in Africa in the sense that, they discovered diamonds in this place and then the guy institutionalized the whole diamond thing. He didn't just pocket the diamonds for himself, but he actually used it to develop and transform Botswana to the point where, per capita incomes went up quite dramatically. He actually used the diamonds in the correct way that you would expect somebody to do if you are blessed with a natural resource and all that. So he said at the end of the class, I think it was an Oxford student or something. I said at the end of the class, so, when they had done all the comparisons with other countries where, they discovered oil or they discovered Israel and the leader just either pocketed it or they just sent it to corruption or fighting and all that. So he said somebody asked him that, okay, so why was Botswana like this? Why did Seretse Sekama do that? Because they couldn't understand. And he said the economics lecturer, he just didn't understand. He didn't have any answer. He just said, sometimes people are good. And that was the end of the
Mhm.
class. You know? And so me, that's what I'm betting on. That, you can just get somebody who just decided that, you know what, this is not good enough, and
Mhm.
we need to really, really change things now. Otherwise, 2050 would not look much different from what it is today. We just have a lot more poor people. I mean, I shared that thing with you. That guy who went around the world. This guy visited every country in the world. You know,
Yeah.
and the Guardian interviewed him and he was talking about all the different countries. And the thing he said about Nigeria was that in Nigeria, I saw unbelievable poverty, and I just thought to myself that wow,
Yeah.
you know, and I mean,
So the story may well be apocryphal, but I hear it's a fairly popular theory that Steve Jobs became an atheist after reading about the Biafra War.
it's possible. It affected people. Biafra War obviously was the first televised war, right? So that was the first time people actually saw war on TV. It had a big impact on people. Previously before that, I mean, World War II, it was not something you could really see on TV. But this time around, Biafra War was the first one that actually came into people's homes on their television and they saw suffering. They saw that crazy amount of suffering with, the whole malnourishment and something. So yes, it's possible. It's possible that definitely I would have expected it to create quite a number of atheists. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Mm.
where I was going with that question is that now, I mean, 2027 is 2 years away. I mean, the elections themselves is even less than 2 years. And of course, the campaign has already started a year
Of
after
course.
the new government. So it's not so surprising. So somebody has been asking what we think about, all the three principal actors, but maybe that's irrelevant. But
Mm.
2027, how do you see things shaking out? The truth is, I am not, I don't know, maybe DSS will come and knock on my door after this, but
Mhm.
I'm not really a Tinubu fan, but I'm not a fan of any of the principal people either,
Mm.
right?
Well, yeah, yeah.
I was pretty stoked on Atiku for a while, but after the Deborah thing, it just showed a
Mm.
flabbergastingly lack of character
Mm.
for me to just say no, right? And uh as excited as I was about the OB project and that whole entire movement, the guy, I think part of the test of true leadership, in my opinion, is the ability to build a team around yourself. And it just cannot be able to
Yeah.
do that. He thinks he's a one man encyclopedia. He thinks he's a one man think tank. and sometimes he just makes a fool of himself. So 2027, how do you see the whole thing shaking out?
Okay, so
I I, I sincerely believe that this coalition thing, I see some of their clips on Insta because, of course, I spend a lot of my social media time share on Instagram, going through their feed, and some of the feed of Tinubu that they post that are supposedly criticism of the guy, actually an advertisement of this guy as a true bureaucrat, as a true Democrat. I'm sorry to say, because you say, we can disagree. I'm not going to use government power to muscle you. And, they are basically selling this guy for a second time. So I'm not sure whether allegedly is not secretly funding ADC, but who knows? Right. Who
yeah,
knows? So,
yeah.
so two things I want us to close with. 2027, how do you see it shaking out? I am fundamentally opposed to Atiku running again. I'm ageist, it's too old. It should rest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah. I mean, to be
But,
honest,
but
I saw him at Buhari's the funeral for Buhari, and the way he was walking, I was just like, is this guy really going to run again? But you know, I think my answer to that would be that one of the things I've always said is that look, I am no fan of Tinubu. I think everyone knows that, but I think that politics is a very, very funny thing. I can't say I fully understand politics, right? The way they play, especially the way they play it in Nigeria. But one thing I've come to is that Tinubu seems to always be blessed with incompetent enemies, right? So with the people who oppose him, so he only has one eye, but obviously all his enemies have no eyes; they are blind, right? So he just always seems to be a cut above the people that are running against. So I fully expect some massive incompetence to play out among the opposition that will then hand him re-election. This is what I expect to happen in the sense that
but wait. Let's give the man some credit, right? So, for example, one of the things that count for him, and I'm being completely honest, I've never voted for him. I've never liked him. I'm not sure I will ever. Uh, but I was listening to the presidential media chat. I think it was December or something. For me, it felt groundbreaking in a way. Maybe the bar is really low for a Nigerian president to openly say that I don't believe in price control.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a big deal.
You know,
Yeah, that's a big deal actually. Yeah.
so I feel like there are some little things which are instinctive, maybe due to
Yeah. It's not based on
maybe
anything.
fear, greed,
Maybe
or
yeah.
avarice, or whatever that makes him.
Maybe he just saw something in Chicago. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you understand, and when I put that against the fact that El Rufai is still running around saying that he's a proud Buhari guy, and I'm just like, am I supposed to take this seriously? Right?
Yeah, well, I guess there's something to be said for that. But obviously, I mean, we know elections are not going to be one of policy, right? In
Of course.
Nigeria, so he's what commends him is that obviously he's a good campaigner, but he's also he's the best at tactics. So the way I try to describe it, and I think I must have tweeted this about something like that. You know, he's like I'm a Man United fan, right? He's like Ruben Amorim in a
Sorry,
certain way. It's not a great time in the sense that Ruben Amorim. You see that if you look at Man United, a lot of what happens during the game, the best thing happen in the second half, right? So we hardly ever score in the first half, and it's telling you a story that the way the coach sets up the team is always wrong. So until he makes changes during the game, Tinubu is really, really good at tactics. So he's not good at strategy, right? So he'll put out a team, but once the game has started, he is very, very good at reacting to it in the sense that, okay, so you will see that once politics kicks off properly, he will be making moves that will just be one step ahead of all his opponents. You know, for now, he might not have a plan right now. He might not have right now as of today. There might be no grand plan for winning the election, for winning the re-election. He just knows he wants to win. But once things kick in properly, and then the jostling starts, he will. And like I said, I fully expect some incompetence on the part of his opponents to play into his hand. So it might just be a question of them not being able to come together or something. And in a three-way, Tinubu cannot win 50% of the votes in Nigeria today.
Mm-hmm.
In a two-way race, it's just not going to happen. But in a three-way race, then 35% might do the job for you. And as long as your opponents, cancel each other out, you go in through the middle, which is, I mean, that's what he did in 2023, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And all that.
yeah.
So that's what I fully expect, that some kind of incompetence will play out. All these coalition people. I mean, look, we know these people. Their egos are the movable objects, right? So they are all in
Mm-hmm.
that party together. They are not going to. You can see the whole nonsense of all of them saying they're only going to do one term, right? You are so good. You are so good. You believe in your plans for Nigeria. You want to really change the country, and you now want to deny us a second term. That so you are coming to do something good for us, and then you only give us one time. Why? So like this whole. So you just know that you can always take that as these are all serious people, really. They are,
Yeah.
and when push comes to shove, when that time comes, then I mean, it will be very very difficult for them to come to an agreement, the kind of agreement and say that okay, it's not like the kind of Jonathan agreement, like whereby the entire political class came together and focused and said, we're getting out Jonathan. So you had the governors that left the PDP and went to the opposition. Even Buhari and Tinubu came together. Tinubu put aside his ego, at that point in time, and then teamed up with Buhari, and everybody just faced the whole idea of getting Jonathan out of office. Can that happen in 2027? I don't think so. Can all of them say, we'll come together and say, okay, we're going to put aside everything, and what we want is just to get this man out of office? Can they even make the case for it?
Mhm.
You know, what is the case they're going to make? Like, okay, he removed fuel subsidy or dollar or something, or he mismanaged the economy or some or those kind of things. You need to really, I mean, so I don't see that. Like I said, I expect him to just be, if his opponents operate at level 0, he will operate at level 1. If they
Mm.
raise
And that,
themselves
that
to
and
level
that might
9,
just be enough to do it.
he will do just enough just to be one step ahead of it. If they raise themselves to level 9, he can raise himself to level 9.5 or something. So that's
Mm.
what I fully expect, in the sense that they will fumble the bag. As the kids say, they
Mm.
will fumble the bag, and the guy will close. I expect it to be a three-way race. That's just what I
Mm.
think. I have no understanding or intel, but I expect it to be a three-way race where, even if he might sponsor somebody to be the third force or so. I mean, Tinubu he has no scruples. There's nothing he cannot do, right? So he's not a moral person. There's nothing that is moral to him. Like, he's not religion, he's not traditional religion, he's not a code of, he can do anything, right? Whatever it takes, he will do it. He has no opposition to corruption, he has no opposition to anything, as long as he just wants power. So he'll do anything, and he'll basically, I expect him to outmaneuver them. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. So, I mean, the final note I want us to close on, because I think we only passed through this for 5 minutes, but here
Yeah,
we are.
yeah. Mhm.
So, the final point I want us to close on is okay, 65 years ago, neither you nor I were alive. Uh, 65 years from now, I don't think we'll be either.
Mhm.
But uh, what it's difficult to predict the future. I don't think people should even try. But 65 years from now, what kind of Nigeria do you, I don't want to say do you see, but what kind of country would you like
Mhm.
your children to see?
Mhm. I think if I were to say it in a simple way, that I would like to see a better organized country. One of the things that has been really upsetting and really annoying me lately is just the whole disorder, right? I mean, Buhari's funeral was what you would call a state funeral.
Mhm.
Look at the mess that it was. It was I mean, like people everywhere, the president standing by the foot of the plane, the foreign minister trying to climb the stairs, and president shouting at him, come back. That was just a mess. We cannot seem to do order in any way. Look at the Olubadan's coronation, just disgusting. Like, Vanguard posted a video saying, and it was saying the arrival of Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso at the
Mhm.
Olubadan's coronation. In that video, soldiers were slapping and beating one guy. And it was just not, it was almost kind of like background, it was just like background noise. And I'm like, so Vanguard tweeted this video, and the fact that they were slapping and beating somebody in that video was not even worth commenting. Like
I
this is
mean,
just
the,
no,
the
it's
media, the
just,
media is
yeah,
a whole different
yeah,
story. On
yeah. So this is
so,
just all. And so I think for me, I would like to see just basic organization, just at the basic level, and
I mean, before you
claiming.
go to that particular point, I was watching something recently on Super Sports. Yeah, I think it was a motor racing in Rwanda, in Kigali,
Mhm.
and you needed to see how organized. I think it was bike
Yeah,
racing or
yeah,
something. How organized the whole thing was, down to the presentation at the podium. And I can't help but think of what is the spectacle that we call Lagos Marathon, for example. You just see Mopo with guns all over the place
yeah.
and Agbero. So, I mean, it's really a problem.
I mean, like today is Independence Day, right? Yesterday, just yesterday, they canceled Independence Day parade. I mean, this is a basic thing that we've been doing all my life. But so maybe they forgot to arrange it, maybe they forgot to organize it, and they just, to avoid embarrassment, they just canceled it at the last minute. And they didn't even give a reason. So there was no Independence Day parade today. So, those kind of just basic organizational stuff. And the second thing for me, and I think this is something that I hope we are contributing to with 1914 Reader, in the sense that reclaiming the public space as a place where we can force out nonsense and just basically using the public, because education is not just what happens in schools, right? People are educated in all kinds of ways. This year, at the beginning of this year, I read a book called The Body by Bill Bryson. I was just like, this is amazing. This is a bestseller. So this is an author who has written a book about the body, right? From head to toe. And he's written it in plain language that and people buy these books and read it for entertainment. And I just thought, wow, that you don't really know what you have, where somebody can write a book about the body and it will sell millions of copies. I mean, can you do that in Nigeria? I mean, even a normal book, it will struggle to sell 10,000. So, but those kind of things are their education as well. I learned so much reading about that, reading about how the ear functions, the brain, and all that stuff. This is all the kind of education, and those things exist in the public space, which is why I hope that, if somebody comes to 1914 reader, read something, at least there, even if it's just a small amount of education, I mean, in our own small way. So basically reclaiming that public. So what I would like to see is that a future where if you turn on the radio, you can hear an intelligent discussion or intelligent conversation that does not assume you're a fool, right? And treats you like a reasonably intelligent adult, you know, or you turn on the TV and you can hear an intelligent conversation. And even podcast, it's not just podcast about people yakking and yakking on about celebrities or who slept with who or who didn't do.
And their
The
private life.
Yeah, exactly, or even our newspapers. You go to a
That shit,
newspaper,
that shit
yeah,
makes me want to stop podcasting every time I see podcast. So,
or even go to our newspapers and you can actually read. I posted a story in below the headlines last week about one report where one guy basically a journalist with Daily Trust, he went to Oluwole, created a fake certificate, fake educational certificate, and
Oh
they
yeah, yeah,
used it
yeah.
to,
I
and they
saw that
used it
on
to,
YouTube.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and used it to get a job. And apart from anything else, but it was just a well-written. So I'm like, we should see more of this kind of stuff, right? Because you open the newspaper today, look, one of the most disgusting things happening today, Channels TV, right, is our biggest TV station, private TV station, and Wike has those guys on a retainer. People think that this whole media chat that Wike does is just organic. No, it's not. He's paying for this stuff, right? And that guy basically can go to channels and just talk for 2 hours or anytime. Like, why is Wike doing media chat, national media chat every month? He just goes there and he just yaks and yaks and yaks for hours. And I'm like, this is so sad. Can you imagine a politician having BBC on retainer where they can just go into BBC every month and they just talk about nonsense and they talk about things like my wife and children are American citizens. Who cares? So I hope that, a future of Nigeria is where you can reclaim those public spaces where, you turn on the TV, it's not just one politician who has paid to be there. Or the story on the front page of the newspaper is not Tom Polo congratulating the president or something. But you can open the
Yeah.
newspaper and
Yeah.
those things, they can form part of education that we are talking about. So that when kids go to school, they're educated. They are also educated by what they listen to on the radio, what they watch on the TV, what they see in the newspaper. That public space, that critical part of education. I hope that we can reclaim it, whereby the level of discourse does not just assume that people are so stupid they cannot have anything else.
I mean, on that note, one of my own bugbears about that has been the media lately. I always tell people that one of the flagship programs in the country right now, every weekday, is that thing they do on Arise TV. Uh, like serious clouds, right? I know organizations where a couple of years ago it used to be CNN, but when you walk into hotels, I mean, name it, it's on Arise. It's a popular platform,
Yeah.
but as in the basic production and organization of that simple show, a format that has been in existence for over 50 years, they still can't get it right. Everybody take turns to give their opinions, and usually something repeats. And they do a segment for 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes, they repeat the same segments. And for some reason, Rufai keeps misusing empirical facts. I don't think he knows what he means. So, even in the quote unquote private sector, you see this basic of
Yeah.
basic organization, and it's if your children and mine could live in such a country, I think that would be progress.
Yes, indeed. Indeed it will be. Okay, thanks a lot for everyone for joining. I didn't think that we'll get that many people. We had well over 100 people. So thanks a lot. Hopefully, people will keep doing this randomly now and again. And thank you. And see you again soon. Next podcast will be out next
Wednesday.
Yeah, next
Yep.
week Wednesday. Yeah, a week from now. It's an interesting one. I'm sure you will enjoy it. So thanks a lot, and see you again soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Peace out. Happy Independence.
Yes.
See, I'm wearing blue. All right, cheers.